Hi everyone, so excited to speak to you all today via podcast. Today I will be talking about conventional agriculture and many of its problems, as well as propose a solution a little bit later. Alright, so currently the food industry is structured so that the production, processing, and distribution of food is controlled by a handful of agriculture corporations. These companies often use both horizontal and vertical integration. Horizontal integration is when one company or a group of companies controls a particular stage of production, such as all of the seeds for a particular crop. While vertical integration is when a company or a group of companies controls multiple stages of production, such as the seeds, how the growing and harvesting is done, and the food processing. Additionally, companies also handle the distribution of the food to various supermarkets in America and beyond, which is the majority of Americans buy their food from. This is creating a separation between food production and food consumption because the American public doesn't know where their food's coming from. It promotes that idea of food from nowhere because we don't know where our food comes from, how it was grown. And this process of conventional agriculture has developed over decades as food corporations are growing in wealth and power, and now we see some of those harmful effects. So let's just go right into it. What are some of these effects? In many cases, a corporation controls almost the whole system of a certain food product. And with that comes problems. For example, some corporations control all inputs of a certain crop. For farmers that buy seeds from the company buyer, they often have to buy the pesticides and the herbicides associated with that seed because the seed may be a GMO, a genetically modified organism that has been made to be resistant to the specific buyer pesticide that kills the associated weeds and pests while not killing the target crop. So this is an example with the weed killer Roundup and Roundup-resistant crops. Roundup-resistant seeds are resistant to Roundup, and Roundup is sprayed on them to kill the weeds and pests while not having an effect on that target crop. However, a potential issue with that is that some of these pests and weeds have adapted to these pesticides and herbicides after continual use, and this is creating super weeds and super pests. Well, we're seeing these now, and these super weeds and super pests are defeating the primary purpose of GMO seeds, which is to be resistant to these chemicals that will kill the weeds and the pests. And it's not working as well anymore. And one of the immediate solutions is to use even more dangerous chemicals, such as dioxins, to kill off these super weeds and super pests. But already to begin with, most of these synthetic inputs are very dangerous and cause an increase in health risks for the farmers. So there's already this issue with super weeds and super pests, and it's not safe for the farmers. The National Black Farmers Association sued Bayer because many of these farmers have to use Roundup-resistant seeds. Now that's due to the horizontal integration of Bayer seeds. They're controlling the market of these seeds. And because the farmers have to use Roundup-resistant seeds, they also have to use Roundup. And Bayer did not inform them about the health risks associated with using Roundup. In fact, they told the farmers that it was safe. If used properly, it would be safe. But this is a highly controversial topic because the EPA has also deemed the chemical to be safe, but the International Agency for Research on Cancer found sufficient evidence to deem that glyphosate, which is a main ingredient in Roundup, is a carcinogen, is cancer-causing. So there's a big controversy there. In addition, using GMOs and the corporate control of these specific food products and inputs leads to monocropping. And we saw how devastating monocropping can be in regards to the Irish potato famine, where a fungus devastated a potato variety that the population depended on. And this resulted in almost 2 million deaths. Monocropping makes our crops much more vulnerable to diseases, makes us, the public, more vulnerable to food devastation if one of these crops were destroyed, and it makes the farmers more dependent on corporations to provide them with the seeds and the inputs for their crops. This But the industry did this, the corporation did this to create more profits using monocropping. And this corporation control of the food industry created a privatization of public land and public resources. This is called the accumulation of dispossession, as mentioned in Chapter 12 of 20 Lessons. And that's taking what used to be public, land, seeds, farming resources, and even these food systems, and making them private and for purchase to make the corporations a profit. For example, farmers of Bayer seeds cannot save their seeds for the next season. They have to buy them from Bayer each season. And if they're suspected to save seeds, the farmers are sued by Bayer, which is a multi-billion-dollar company, and that destroys the farmer's livelihood. For more information, I really suggest watching Food Inc. It's a documentary you can watch on watchdocumentaries.com. But this documentary is so good and it encompasses a lot of what I'm saying. So we already mentioned the frequent use of chemical inputs in agriculture, and that's due to the monocropping, due to the GMOs and the corporations controlling with horizontal and vertical integration. Nitrogen is also used as a fertilizer for these crops. Nitrogen has to be used in conventional agriculture now, and that's because monocropping has taken out the nutrients from the soil because the same crop has been grown on this land over and over again. And the nitrogen fertilizer became popular after the crop livestock systems were greatly eliminated due to large corporation farming. The crop livestock system is where crop byproducts are used to feed the livestock, and the manure of the livestock was then used as a fertilizer for the soil. But this system became less and less used as food production came into corporate control, and large specialized farms for only one product became popular. So there wasn't livestock to fertilize the crops and vice versa, with the crops providing food for the livestock. Therefore, a nitrogen fertilizer is needed to replenish the nutrients in the soil that the manure would have done. But this nitrogen fertilizer has a lot of problems. When it runs off the lands, it causes significant water pollution, and there's algae blooms are created, and this reduces the water oxygen levels, leading to the death of many aquatic populations and affecting our ecosystems. There's one dead zone is where the Mississippi ends and enters the Gulf of Mexico. It's almost 9,000 square miles, all because of this nitrogen fertilizer. And this is also occurring with a different system called the Confined Animal Feeding Operations, CAFOs. So CAFOs replaced that crop livestock system I mentioned earlier with the goal to process livestock faster. And it reduced the number of small farms because large corporations would only contract with large farms who would use the CAFOs technique. As you can imagine, CAFOs, Confined Animal Feeding Operations, included tightly packed, fast-growing animals. The feces and the urine of the livestock fall through slants on the floor of the livestock enclosures and is pumped into waste lagoons to evaporate. If the waste levels get too high in these lagoons, and as rainwater mixes with the lagoon, the liquid is pumped out and sprayed on grasses that are used to pull the nitrogen and phosphorus of the feces and urine into the land. But these grasses have no market value, and this slurry of feces, urine, and water is highly toxic. People have fallen into it and died. And the slurry runs off into other water systems because the lands of these grasses become oversaturated with the spray of the slurry, so they run off into other water systems, and waste lagoons overflow due to heavy rainfall and hurricanes. This pollution in our waterways causes so many negative health impacts to the surrounding population, such as drinking water and recreation swimming areas are contaminated. This pollution isn't regulated because it is a non-point source and not directly from the CAFO. It is the runoff and the aerosol of the slurry that is sprayed on the grass field. Water pollution from the CAFO runoff and overflows of lagoons also cause the algae blooms and the oxygen depletion in the water, creating dead zones and an excess of bacteria like the nitrogen fertilizer does. Today in class, we saw satellite images of pools of pig feces and urine. It's one thing to describe them, but it's a whole other thing to see a visualization of them. There's so many of these pools so close together in the eastern North Carolina area. And they're close to residential areas, which feeds us into the next part, unequal distribution of environmental and social impacts of CAFOs on surrounding counties. Workers of CAFOs and individuals in nearby communities experience a higher rate of respiratory conditions and symptoms of headaches, nausea, burning eyes, and so many more due to the fumes and toxic gases from the CAFOs. There's contamination of the drinking water from the CAFOs, and that can also lead to transfer of diseases from pigs to humans. And the quality of life in these areas are so poor, since in so many cases you can't even relax outside your home due to the fumes. On top of it, it's very difficult to move away because these individuals living close by to CAFOs are unable to sell their homes due to the CAFOs. Studies have shown that CAFOs in eastern North Carolina are disproportionately located in communities with higher percentages of Black individuals and lower income families. The burden of CAFOs are not distributed across the state and its people, and these unequal distribution of externalities are seen in so many cases with our current food industry system. It can be seen as the global north demands production and importation of food from the global south. The global south food production is also corporately controlled, but has often less regulations on pollution and working conditions than the global north. These poor working conditions, low wages, and other social conditions in the area lead to implicit hunger and explicit hunger. Implicit hunger is a deficiency of nutrients caused by an excess access to unhealthy food, such as from food deserts and food swamps. What's the difference between a food desert and a food swamp? Food deserts are areas that have limited access to affordable, fresh, healthy foods, like fruits and veggies, while food swamps are an excessive access to unhealthy foods, such as fast foods and liquor stores and convenience stores. So while implicit hunger is caused by that constant consumption of not very nutritious foods, and this can be seen as a very popular issue in America with the rise of obesity and diabetes rates. Explicit hunger is a severe problem in the global south because many people cannot buy enough food due to the low wages from their jobs in the food industry, and food has gone up in cost. Okay, so what do all of these problems have in common? First of all, I would like to point out that these are just a few examples of all of the problems in the food industry. I didn't even go into beef production, meat lobbying, and subsidies. I think I need an environmental solutions podcast part 2 for that. But for the ones that I covered, what do these problems have in common? The pollution, the poor livelihood for the farmers and those living close by, the implicit and explicit hunger, and all the poor environmental effects. Well, they are all associated with large corporations and their control over the system of food industry. These companies have privatized the land, standardized the seeds, and the inputs of the chemicals cause runoff and pollution, and the CAFOs and all the other systems cause unequal disparities across workers and communities. So this can be held all under the umbrella of the externalities of scale. The externalities of scale is due to the large scale of corporations and their food processes, like CAFOs, all of these large-scale externalities, like all the pollution, they are occurring and there's not as many sustainable ways to address them. In smaller farms, externalities can be handled sustainably with good waste disposal because there's less waste. But with large farms, there are few sustainable ways to handle so much waste, so much pollution, so much chemical use. And on top of all of this, most of the public is completely separated from the food production and food processing. So we don't even think about where our food comes from anymore. What are the processes that are involved with our food? and we have no personal connections to our food and the land. Oftentimes, the corporations as well limit our understanding of these issues because they try to keep them as hidden as possible, like with the Roundup and its health effects. What do I propose? I propose that we need food sovereignty. What is food sovereignty? Food sovereignty brings food power back to the people, and specifically local communities. There are 6 pillars of food sovereignty described by Global Justice Now, a UK organization focused on social justice. Food sovereignty focuses on producing a diverse variety of food for a group of local people. Food sovereignty values food producers and farmers. Their number one priority is providing food for the local population, and the second is exporting it out for trading and profit. Food sovereignty keeps food control locally and to share the food and cultivate diversity sustainably. So that's reducing the privatization and the monocropping from the corporations as we discussed previously. Food sovereignty supports development and spreading of agricultural knowledge through generations and prioritizes nature and avoids finds solutions for practices that excessively use fossil fuel energy or cause pollution and depletion of Earth's resources. So it's very sustainable because they're attacking it head-on and locally in small groups. An example of food sovereignty cooperative is Fannie Lou Hamer's Freedom Farms Cooperative in the 1960s. I really like this example because we can learn a lot from it. For some context, in the 1960s in the South, most black individuals were pressured to not register to vote by the white population through a variety of ways. There was violence and laws, but one way is that most black families did not own their land. They worked on white-owned farms using the sharecropper system. Since these black families worked on their farms, depended on their work on these farms to survive and eat, if they tried to register to vote, they would end up starving due to white oppression and the control of their crops. Sharecropping was an exploitative economic and political relationship between the landowner and the sharecropper. Fannie Lou Hamer, an activist for black voters' rights during this time, believed that owning land was the key to voter registration and political power. I think we can learn a lot from the Freedom Farms Cooperative, or the FFC as I'll call them. These black farmers did not have the power to stand up to their white oppressors for political freedom. As we see today with the people working in the food industry, they don't have the power to stand up against the corporations because if they do so, they will lose their livelihood as a farmer. What I hope to suggest is that we go off on our own path, similar to the Freedom Farms Cooperative. So the FFC purchased a few hundred acres of land and developed an agriculture system that would meet the nutritional needs of the county's most vulnerable populations. They grew subsistence and kitchen crops for its members, and they donated extra crops to those that could not work on the farms. A pig bank was formed to have hundreds of pigs that could be mated, slaughtered, and sold for extra income. And the pig bank provided those members with thousands of pounds of pork for consumption and supplemental income when sold. So now the Freedom Farms Cooperative gave these farmers a place of work, a job, and they have healthy food for themselves and their families and proteins from the meat to become more self-reliant. Along with this, the FFC created a supportive community within its members. They supported the building of affordable and safe housing. There was job education for members in construction, food preservation, business, and sewing. The FFC offered employment through the agricultural program with the farming and the administrating. But there was also healthcare programs, and when natural disasters struck, the FFC provided clothing, food boxes, and financial assistance to its members. All of these programs and services increases the self-reliance of its members and improved many different sides of individual social determinants of health. The FFC finally accomplished political power for their members. members were able to register, to vote, and not go hungry because they were much more self-sufficient and could partake in activism. This smaller farming cooperative can be used similarly in today's system. To stop the reliance on corporations for food consumption, I think we need to go back to the smaller local farmers model. Community gardens, farmers markets, local farming cooperatives. These promote food sovereignty, as users know where their food is coming from and are more likely to feel connected to their food and reduce food waste. Additionally, smaller farms are already known to be more sustainable due to their smaller amounts of waste, and with that, they are better equipped as sustainable disposal. That's like the crop livestock system, as I discussed before. The crop byproducts are used as livestock's feed, and the livestock manure is used as fertilizer instead of nitrogen and other harmful chemicals. Also, planting more diverse plants and not just one crop in a large area, like monocropping, planting more diverse plants will reduce those concerns of monocropping and super pests. And this is all promoting food sovereignty, which will bring the power back to the people. Compared to the privatization of lands and farming resources, public farm lands will lead to more sustainable practices and resilient communities. Corporations will not have control over all parts of a certain food production, and the social disparities will be addressed as locals finally have say in their food systems and the power to do so. I understand, though, that in some of these cases, national and transnational food companies are still needed. We cannot grow all types of crops in each area, and some regions may have few farming capabilities due to poor soil or the climate. There is such a thing as seasons and growing and harvesting seasons as well, and I'm not sure if many Americans would give up coffee or chocolate if they only kept to eating things that were grown in their local area. But I believe that the solution to many of our problems with the corporate farm industry is to prioritize local farming and consumption first. Trading with other small farming cooperatives is also beneficial, and in cases of natural disasters or a poor harvesting season, purchasing from other small groups of farms will also be essential. But prioritizing local farming will make all of us involved in the process more aware and able to address issues with disparities and unsustainable practices while providing farmers with a better livelihood, and we will all value our food and our land much more. Now, how likely is this change going to happen? And it's definitely not going to happen overnight. If legislation is pushed for the funding of smaller farms, that will strongly be fought back by corporate superpowers. To make it a sustainable change, each one of us needs to make a concerted effort to buy from farmers markets, to work at community gardens on the weekends, to think about where your food is coming from and choose the best options. But I know that's a lot. We don't have all the time to check that we are making the best food decisions for ourselves, the environment, and farmers every single day. But if we bring our choices back locally, to local cooperatives, we can make those options more readily available for the community, and then educate the community on the reasons to change how they interact with food. And we could begin the sustainable change in the food industry. I have the hope that we can do so. As I end, it is important to understand how deeply complex the food system is. That's why this podcast is so long. The food system is so complex, and I can go on and on about different aspects of production, processing, distribution, legislation, and lobbying. There's the economic perspective, the social, the environmental, the local and federal side. I myself was having problems talking in a general sense about some issues while then getting more specific and back to general. I feel as if I've almost skimmed over these issues, and I want to talk about each one in depth and add more pieces to my actually small explanation of the food system. To my friends that I've convinced to give this a listen, feel free to reach out. I would love to have a conversation with you. Thank you so much for listening, and we can all make a difference by supporting local food cooperatives and bringing the control of food systems back locally. Signing off, Mackenzie.